She was not merely rejected. She was destroyed before every pack in the kingdom by the very Alpha King the gods had chosen for her. And when she returned 6 months later standing beside his greatest rival, the mate who had cast her aside felt the severed bond scream the moment he saw her. Seris Ashvale never imagined that the most devastating moment of her life would happen while she was trying desperately to disappear. Before we go any further, if stories of mercy, power, and hidden kings pull you in, tap subscribe now. This channel is where forgotten souls become legends, and tomorrow's story is even more intense. Now, let's begin. The grand annual gathering was always overwhelming. Hundreds of wolves from every pack across the kingdom of Iron Peak filled the massive stone great hall of the royal castle, celebrating alliances, displaying wealth, reinforcing the hierarchy that ruled their world. For the powerful packs and their noble families, it was an opportunity to shine, to negotiate, to climb higher. For the Ash Valley pack, it was an obligation they fulfilled with gritted teeth and bowed heads. And Seris was pressed against the cold stone wall in the darkest corner of the hall, wearing the only formal dress she owned, a borrowed piece of faded blue linen that had been altered 3 times to fit her smaller frame. The hem was uneven where she'd hastily stitched it the night before. The bodice gaped slightly at the shoulders. The fabric was thin enough that the chill from the stone wall seeped through to her skin. She didn't belong here, surrounded by silks and velvets, jewels and ceremonial furs, wolves who moved with the confidence of those who'd never questioned their place in the world. Seris kept her eyes lowered, her simple brown hair falling forward to partially hide her face. She'd learned early that it was better not to be noticed. Better to fade into the background, to become part of the stone and shadow, invisible to those who mattered. Her fingers twisted nervously in the fabric of her skirt as she watched the celebration from her corner. Alpha King Kaelen stood on the raised platform at the far end of the hall, surrounded by advisors and high-ranking wolves, discussing matters of state with the casual authority of someone born to rule. He was 28, handsome in a harsh, angular way, all sharp jawlines and cold grey eyes that seemed to calculate the worth of everything they surveyed. Seris had seen him before, of course. Everyone had. But she'd never been close enough to matter, never been important enough to warrant his attention. Which was exactly how she preferred it. Then the world tilted. It started as a bolt of pure energy that struck her directly in the chest, so sudden, so overwhelming that Seris gasped audibly, her hand flying to her heart as a sensation unlike anything she'd ever experienced exploded through her entire body. It wasn't pain. It was power. It was recognition. It was a connection so visceral, so absolute that it made her knees nearly buckle. Her inner wolf, usually quiet, almost subdued after years of learning to hide, surged to life with a force that stole her breath. Mate. The word reverberated through every fiber of her being, undeniable and sacred. The bond the gods themselves forged between destined pairs, the rarest gift the moon could bestow. No. No, this couldn't be happening. Not here. Not now. Not with. Seris's head snapped up, her hazel eyes wide with shock, searching frantically through the crowded hall. The pull was magnetic, irresistible, dragging her attention with supernatural force in one specific direction. Across the hall, Alpha King Kaelen went completely rigid. He'd been mid-sentence in a conversation with the Alpha of Northridge when it hit him, like lightning that started in his chest and exploded outward through every nerve, every muscle, every cell in his powerful body. His carefully controlled wolf, the beast he'd mastered through decades of discipline, roared to furious life. Mate. Now. Find. Claim. Kaelen's breath caught. His heart slammed against his ribs with primal urgency he'd never experienced. The bond was forming, he could feel it, that golden thread of destiny weaving between his soul and someone's. No. This wasn't the plan. This wasn't the carefully orchestrated political alliance his advisors had been arranging. This wasn't. But his body didn't care about plans. His dark eyes moved of their own accord, scanning the packed hall with predatory focus, searching for the source of that devastating pull that was tearing through every rational thought he possessed. And then he found her. In the shadows. In the corners. Where wolves from insignificant packs stood and tried not to take up space. A young woman in a dress that didn't fit properly, with plain features and uncertain posture, staring back at him with the same shocked recognition blazing in her wide eyes. The bond sang between them, warm, inevitable, absolute. For one heartbeat, Kaelen felt something he'd never in his 28 years experienced: completeness. As if a part of him that had always been missing had suddenly, miraculously been found. The great hall seemed to fade. The hundreds of wolves, the political maneuvering, the weight of the crown, all of it disappeared until there was only her. Only this impossible, undeniable connection. Then reality crashed back. His chief advisor leaned in, whispering urgently, "Your Majesty, what's wrong?" Another voice, his beater, "The bond, did you just?" Kaelen's eyes refocused, seeing the girl clearly now. Really seeing her. The borrowed dress. The common features. The way she stood like she was trying to take up as little space as possible. No jewelry. No status markers. No indication of noble blood or political value. This was the mate the gods had chosen for him? This unremarkable girl from, he scented the air, Ash Valley, the poorest pack in his kingdom? His advisors were staring at him with barely concealed alarm. Half the hall had noticed their alpha king frozen, staring at a nobody in the corner. Whispers were starting to spread. Kaelen's jaw clenched. He'd spent 3 years building his authority, establishing his kingdom's power, negotiating alliances that would secure their future. He had responsibilities. Duties. A carefully planned political marriage that would unite the northern and western territories. He wouldn't, let the arbitrary whim of a mate bond destroy everything he'd built. Across the hall, Seris watched as something shifted in the Alpha King's expression. The momentary wonder in his eyes froze over. His face went cold. Hard. Calculating. And she knew, with the terrible certainty of someone who'd spent her whole life being dismissed, that he was about to make a choice. Before she could move, before she could flee, before she could do anything at all, Kaelen straightened to his full height. His voice, when he spoke, was magically amplified to carry to every corner of the great hall. Every conversation died. Every eye turned to their king. And Seris, still pinned against the cold stone wall by the weight of the mate bond and 500 staring wolves, felt her world begin to collapse. "I acknowledge the bond," Kaelen said, his voice cold and formal and utterly final. "And I refuse it." Gasps rippled through the great hall like a shockwave, hundreds of voices erupting in shocked whispers and disbelieving murmurs. This was unprecedented. Unthinkable. An Alpha King acknowledging and then rejecting a god's-ordained mate bond before witnesses? But Kaelen wasn't finished. Seris of Ash Valley. His voice cut through the chaos with cold precision, each word falling like a stone into still water. "You bring nothing to this throne. No political alliances. No wealth to strengthen our kingdom. No noble bloodline to elevate our house." Seris couldn't move. Couldn't breathe. Could only stand frozen as the Alpha King catalogued her inadequacies before 500 witnesses. "You are," Kaelen paused, and something flickered across his face before his expression hardened again into cold resolve, "unsuitable for the role of queen. You lack the education, the training, the status required for such a position. I therefore exercise my right as Alpha King to reject this bond." The formal words of rejection followed, ancient and binding. Each syllable tore through Seris like claws raking across her soul. The bond, that golden, sacred connection that had bloomed between them mere moments ago, began to fracture. It didn't fade gently. It didn't slip away like a pleasant dream upon waking. It shattered. Seris's scream ripped from her throat before she could stop it, raw, agonized, inhuman. She collapsed to her knees on the cold stone floor, hands clawing at her chest where the connection had lived for those few precious heartbeats. It felt like her soul was being torn in half, like every nerve ending in her body was being set on fire and frozen solid simultaneously. This was spiritual damage, the kind that couldn't be healed with medicines or time. This was a destined bond being severed against its very nature. Wolves near her stumbled back, unable to witness the agony. Some looked away in horror. Others watched with morbid fascination. Healers rushed forward, but there was nothing they could do. No salve, no spell, no technique could mend what Kaelen had just broken. Through the red haze of pain, Seris felt her wolf rising, not gently, but with violent, protective fury. Her body began to shift involuntarily, bones cracking and reforming, fur erupting across her skin as her wolf took control to flee this unbearable torment. The last thing Seris saw before her vision changed to the sharper sight of her wolf form was Kaelen's face, still cold, still resolved, as he turned his back on her and walked away from his destined mate without a second glance. Then instinct took over, and Seris ran. 3 days of running. 3 days of her wolf in complete control while Seris's human consciousness cowered in the back of her own mind, unable to bear the constant agony where the bond had been. No food. No rest. Just the desperate, primal need to escape, to put distance between herself and the source of this unbearable pain. She didn't know when she crossed the border out of Iron Peak territory. Didn't realize she'd entered the rival kingdom of Stormvale until her wolf finally, mercifully collapsed beside a clear stream deep in foreign forest. The shift back to human form happened slowly, painfully. Seris lay naked and shivering on the moss-covered bank, too exhausted to even cry anymore. Her feet were cut and bleeding from 3 days of running. Her body was covered in scratches from tearing through underbrush. But the physical pain was nothing compared to the hollow, screaming emptiness in her chest. She should move. Should find shelter, clothing, something. But what was the point? The mate bond was supposed to be sacred. Unbreakable. The greatest gift the gods could bestow. And hers had been rejected like she was garbage Kaelen couldn't be bothered to keep. Inadequate. Unsuitable. Nothing. His words played on repeat in her mind. Maybe he was right. Maybe she was. The sound of approaching footsteps made Seris's head snap up weakly. Her wolf stirred but was too exhausted to respond with anything more than a warning growl that died in her throat. 6 wolves emerged from the trees. Large, scarred, moving with the confident swagger of rogues, wolves who'd been cast out of or abandoned their packs, who survived by preying on the vulnerable. And Seris, naked and broken and alone on their territory, was the perfect prey. The leader shifted to human form, a massive male with a jagged scar across his face and cruel eyes. Well, what do we have here? He inhaled deeply, and his smile widened. A broken bond. You're a rejected mate, aren't you, little wolf? Seris tried to move, tried to shift, tried to do anything, but her body wouldn't respond. Fresh rejection too, by the smell of it. Another rogue circled her, predatory and eager. She's weak. Defenseless. No pack to protect her out here. The first week in Stormvale Castle passed in a haze of pain, sleep, and careful healing. Seris's physical wounds mended faster than expected. The rogue wolf's claws and teeth had done significant damage, but Alaric's healers were exceptionally skilled. They worked with a combination of traditional herbs, spiritual energy manipulation, and something Seris had never experienced before, genuine compassion. The head healer, a woman named Myra with silver-streaked hair and knowing amber eyes, visited twice daily to check Seris's progress. She never asked about the rejection. Never pressed for details about how a girl from Ash Valley ended up half dead in Stormvale territory. She simply treated Seris's wounds with expert hands and left healing tinctures that actually worked. You have a gift, Myra observed one morning as she unwrapped the bandages around Seris's ribs. The claw marks that should have taken weeks to heal were already fading to pink scars. Your body is responding to the treatments faster than normal. Have you ever studied healing? Seris shook her head. My mother was our pack's healer. I helped her sometimes, but I wasn't trained properly. Myra's experienced fingers probed gently around the wounds. You have natural talent. The way your body channels healing energy, that's not something that can be taught. It's innate. She met Seris's eyes. When you're stronger, if you're interested, I'd be happy to teach you proper technique. The offer hung in the air between them. It was the first time since the rejection that someone had suggested Seris might have a future. Might have value beyond being a discarded mate. I'd like that, Seris whispered. But while her body healed, her spirit remained fractured. The broken mate bond was a constant, hollow ache in her chest, like a phantom limb that her consciousness kept reaching for only to find empty space. Sometimes she'd wake from fitful sleep gasping, having dreamed the rejection was just a nightmare, only to feel the devastating absence all over again. The nightmares came frequently. Kaelen's cold voice cataloguing her flaws. The moment the bond shattered. The feeling of her soul being torn in half while hundreds watched. Inadequate. Unsuitable. Nothing. She'd wake in tears, or screaming, or simply staring at the ceiling as dawn light crept through the window, wondering why the gods had chosen her for this mate bond only to let it be destroyed so brutally. Alaric never intruded, but he somehow always knew when the nights were bad. He'd appear in the morning with tea and breakfast, sitting in the chair by her bed, talking about neutral topics, the weather, the castle's history, amusing stories about his beater's ongoing feud with the head cook, until Seris's racing heart calmed and the panic receded. He never demanded gratitude. Never asked for her story. Simply offered steady, reliable presence. "Why are you doing this?" Seris asked one morning after a particularly brutal nightmare had left her hollow-eyed and shaking. "You don't know me. You don't owe me anything. I'm nobody from a poor pack who stumbled into your territory." Alaric set down his teacup carefully, his silver-grey eyes thoughtful. "My mate died 3 years ago. Illness. There was nothing anyone could do. We'd only had 5 years together, but they were." He paused, and pain flickered across his face. "They were everything." "I'm sorry," Seris said quietly. "The point is," Alaric continued, "I know what it feels like to lose a mate bond. Mine was severed by death, which is the natural way, painful, but accepted by our spirits. What Kaelen did to you." His jaw tightened. "Rejecting a God's-ordained bond for political convenience? That's not just cruel. It's sacrilege. A mate bond is supposed to be a gift, not a weapon to be used and discarded." He leaned forward, his gaze intense but kind. "You asked why I'm doing this. It's because someone should have caught you when you fell. Someone should have told you that Kaelen's rejection says everything about his character and nothing about your worth. And since no one else did," he shrugged. "I will." Seris felt tears burning behind her eyes. He was right though. "I don't have political value. I'm not educated in governance or diplomacy. I'm plain and common Anne." "Stop." Alaric's command was gentle but absolute. "Don't repeat his poison as truth. A mate bond isn't about political advantage. It's about two souls recognizing each other. The gods chose you for him because you were right for him, but he was too blind and too cowardly to see it. That's his failure, Seris. Not yours." The words settled over her like a balm, not healing the wound but easing its sting. "I'm not trying to replace what you lost," Alaric added carefully. "I'm not offering you another mate bond or trying to claim you in any way. I'm simply offering friendship. Mentorship, if you want it. A safe place to heal and figure out who you are beyond being someone's rejected mate." Seris looked at this Alpha King who had every reason to use her as a political tool against Kaelen but instead offered genuine kindness. "I don't understand why you'd do that." Alaric smiled sadly. "Because I believe wolves should be valued for who they are, not what political advantage they bring. And because I think you have potential you've never been allowed to explore." 3 weeks after her arrival, Alaric invited Seris to a small dinner with his inner circle. She almost refused. The last time she'd been in a formal setting with nobility, she'd been publicly destroyed. The thought of facing more high-ranking wolves made her stomach clench with anxiety. "It's just 5 people," Alaric assured her. "My beater, 2 of my senior advisors, and Myra. They already know you're here. They're curious about the healer Myra won't stop praising." "She praises me?" Seris asked, surprised. "Constantly. Apparently you have insights about herbal combinations she's never considered. Something about intuitive understanding of how different plants interact spiritually." Despite her fear, Seris agreed. Myra had lent her a dress, simple but well-made, in a soft grey blue that actually fit her properly. She braided her hair carefully and took several deep breaths before following Alaric to a small dining room in the private wing of the castle. The dinner was nothing like the formal gatherings in Iron Peak. The room was warm and intimate, lit by candles rather than harsh magical lights. Alaric's beater, a man named Corwin with laugh lines around his eyes, greeted her with genuine warmth. The 2 advisors, an older male named Theron and a sharp-eyed female named Alara, treated her with respectful curiosity rather than judgment. "Myra says you're a natural soul weaver," Alara said as they settled around the table. "That's exceptionally rare. Most healers can only work with physical wounds." "I don't know what that means," Seris admitted, keeping her eyes on her plate. Sometimes I can sense when something's wrong that isn't visible. Like a wrongness in the energy flow." "That's exactly what soul weaving is," Myra explained. "Most healers can't perceive spiritual damage at all, let alone sense how to repair it. You diagnosed a partially torn mate bond in one of my patients last week, something I'd completely missed because the physical symptoms were so subtle. The woman with the persistent headaches? Seris asked. I just noticed her energy felt fractured somehow. Like part of her was reaching for something that wasn't quite there. Theron leaned forward with interest. And your suggestion to strengthen the bond rather than treat the symptoms, where did that insight come from? Seris hesitated, feeling all their eyes on her. I don't know. It just made sense. If the bond is weak, treating the headaches won't fix the underlying problem. You have to heal what's actually broken. Spoken like someone who understands trauma, Corwin said gently. Both how to survive it and how to heal from it. The knowing look in his eyes made Seris realize they all knew what had happened to her. About the rejection. About Kaelen. But none of them were looking at her with pity or judgment, just respect. Tell me, Ilara said, smoothly changing the subject. What's your perspective on the new trade regulations affecting the outer territories? Alaric mentioned you're from Ash Valley. You'd have first-hand experience with how these policies impact smaller packs. Seris blinked, surprised anyone would ask her opinion on policy. The regulations are written by people who've never lived in poverty. They make sense on paper but they don't account for reality. Explain, Alaric encouraged. Haltingly at first, then with growing confidence, Seris outlined the ways the kingdom's well-intentioned trade policies actually harmed the packs they were supposed to help. She talked about the gap between what looked good in council chambers versus what actually worked in villages where wolves struggled to feed their families. By the end of her explanation, all 4 of Alaric's advisors were taking notes. This is exactly the perspective we've been missing, Theron said, looking at Alaric. We've been designing policy from the top down. We need someone who understands the bottom up. Would you be willing to consult on policy matters? Alaric asked Seris. Your insights are invaluable. Seris stared at him. I'm not. I don't have formal education in governance. You have something better, Ilara interrupted. You have lived experience and the intelligence to analyze it. That's worth more than any theoretical education. For the first time since the rejection, Seris felt a spark of something other than pain and shame. She felt useful, valued, not for a mate bond or political status, but for her mind, her insights, her actual contributions. Yes, she said quietly. I'd like that. As the dinner continued, the conversation flowing easily between policy discussion and personal stories, Seris caught herself almost smiling. The hollow ache of the broken bond was still there, it would probably always be there, but it no longer felt like it was consuming everything else. Later, as Alaric walked her back to her quarters, he asked, how did it feel? Being at that table. Seris considered the question carefully. Like maybe I could be more than what Kaelen said I was. Like maybe inadequate and unsuitable were his limitations, not mine. Alaric's smile was warm and proud. Now you're beginning to understand. Alone in her room that night, Seris looked at her reflection in the small mirror above the wash basin. She still saw the same plain features, the same freckles and simple brown hair that Kaelen had catalogued as insufficient. But something in her eyes had changed. A small spark of defiance. A tiny flame of determination. Her wolf stirred, no longer cowering but cautiously hopeful. We survived. We can become more. Seris touched the place over her heart where the bond had been, where it still ached with phantom pain. He broke us, she whispered to her reflection. But he didn't destroy us. We're still here. And for the first time since the rejection, she meant it. The second month in Stormvale brought a shift Seris hadn't anticipated, purpose. Alaric hadn't been exaggerating when he said her insights were valuable. After that first dinner, she found herself invited to more policy discussions, asked to review proposed regulations, consulted on matters affecting the kingdom's outer territories. At first, she'd sit quietly, afraid to speak, certain she'd say something foolish and reveal how truly inadequate she was. But Theron and Ilara had a way of drawing her out, asking pointed questions that required her specific perspective. And when she finally worked up the courage to contribute, they listened. Actually listened, took notes, implemented her suggestions. Within 2 weeks, Alaric officially appointed her as an advisor on territorial affairs. You don't have to accept, he'd said when he offered the position. I know you're still healing. But I think having purpose might help with that healing. He was right. Having work, real, meaningful work, gave Seris something to focus on besides the hollow ache in her chest. The broken bond was still there, still hurt, but it no longer consumed her every waking thought. But Alaric insisted on more than just intellectual development. You need to be able to defend yourself, he said one morning, leading her to the training grounds where his warriors practiced daily combat drills. What happened with the rogues? That can't happen again. Seris looked at the dozen massive wolves sparring in various forms, human, wolf, and the half-shifted battle form that combined the best of both. They moved with lethal grace, confident in their power, secure in their strength. She felt small and weak and utterly out of place. I can't do that, she said quietly. I'm not a warrior. I've never trained for combat. Then it's time to start. Alaric gestured to a female warrior built like a mountain, tall, muscular, with scars crossing her arms and a no-nonsense expression. This is Captain Lissa. She's going to teach you to fight. Lissa looked Seris up and down with an assessing gaze that was clinical rather than judgmental. You're smaller than most. Weaker than most, currently. But we can work with that. Size isn't everything in combat. Speed, strategy, and knowing when to strike matter more. The first training session was humiliating. Seris couldn't hold a defensive stance for more than 30 seconds before her muscles gave out. Her punches were weak and poorly aimed. When Lissa demonstrated a basic takedown, Seris found herself flat on her back so fast she didn't even see the movement. Lying in the dirt, breathing hard, she felt tears of frustration burning behind her eyes. Kaelen was right. I'm weak. Inadequate. I can't. Get up. Lissa's voice was firm but not unkind. You're going to fall a lot before you learn not to. That's part of training. I'm terrible at this, Seris said, not moving from the ground. You're untrained at this. There's a difference. Lissa extended a hand. The only way to get better is to keep trying. So get up. Seris took the offered hand. She fell 17 more times that first day. But she got up 18 times. The training was brutal. Every morning before dawn, Seris reported to the training grounds where Lissa put her through exercises that left her muscles screaming and her body covered in bruises. Basic combat stances. Defensive maneuvers. Learning to read an opponent's body language to anticipate their moves. Stop trying to match strength with strength, Lissa instructed during their second week. You'll never be the biggest wolf in a fight. So be the smartest. Use their momentum against them. Strike weak points. Make them work harder than you do. Slowly, painfully slowly, Seris improved. Her muscles adapted. Her reflexes sharpened. She started anticipating Lissa's training attacks and actually blocking them occasionally. 3 weeks into training, she won her first sparring match against another trainee, a young male wolf who'd underestimated her. When he lunged expecting to overpower her easily, Seris sidestepped, used his momentum to throw him off balance, and pinned him before he could recover. The victory was small, but it felt monumental. See? Lissa said with the closest thing to a smile Seris had seen on her face. You're learning to fight smart, not just hard. Keep that up. While her body grew stronger, her mind expanded in ways she'd never imagined possible. Theron took personal interest in her political education, spending hours teaching her the intricacies of pact diplomacy, alliance structures, and the economic systems that governed inter-pact trade. Ilara taught her to read people, to spot lies, identify hidden agendas, navigate the subtle power plays that happened in every council meeting. Politics is just combat with words instead of claws, Ilara explained. Same principles apply: read your opponent, anticipate their moves, strike when they are vulnerable. Seris discovered she had a talent for it. Her years of being invisible, of watching from the shadows while trying not to be noticed, had taught her to observe. She saw patterns others missed, noticed when someone's words didn't match their body language, understood the unspoken dynamics in every room. When a trade dispute arose between two of Stormvale's northern packs, Alaric asked Seris to sit in on the mediation. Both alphas were posturing, neither willing to compromise, and the meeting was going nowhere. Seris watched quietly for 30 minutes, then spoke. You're both arguing about trade routes, but that's not actually what this dispute is about, is it? Both alphas turned to stare at her. You she nodded to the older alpha. Feel disrespected because the younger pack challenged your traditional authority in the region. And you, she looked at the younger, feel like the old guard won't give you space to grow. This isn't about trade. It's about status and recognition. The room went silent. Then the older alpha sighed heavily. She's not wrong. By the end of the meeting, they'd worked out a compromise that addressed both the practical trade issues and the underlying status concerns. As they left, both alphas thanked Seris personally for her insight. Alaric caught her eye across the table, pride evident in his expression. The transformation wasn't just mental and physical. It was visible. Myra had taken Seris shopping in the castle town. You can't keep borrowing my clothes forever, dear, and helped her select a proper wardrobe. Not the borrowed, ill-fitting garments she'd worn in Iron Peak, but clothes that actually suited her. Deep jewel tones that brought out the warmth in her hazel eyes. Well-tailored dresses that fit her smaller frame properly. Try this one, Myra said, holding up a dress in emerald green. Trust me. When Seris looked at herself in the mirror wearing it, she barely recognized her reflection. The color made her skin glow. The fit emphasized her figure rather than drowning it. Her hair, which Myra had taught her to style properly, framed her face in soft waves instead of hanging limp. She didn't look like a different person. She looked like herself. But a version of herself she'd never been allowed to become. That's the one, Myra declared. Green is definitely your color. It suits you, represents growth, renewal, healing. The physical changes came from more than just clothing. Regular meals and combat training had transformed her body. She was still small, but now she was lean and strong rather than thin and malnourished. Her posture had changed too. Months of being treated with respect had taught her to hold her head up, to meet people's eyes directly instead of keeping her gaze down. The biggest change, though, was internal. When Seris looked in the mirror now, she didn't see the inadequate girl Kaelen had rejected. She saw a woman who'd survived something that should have killed her. Who'd learned to fight, to think strategically, to contribute meaningfully to important decisions. Who'd discovered she had value that had nothing to do with mate bonds or political status. The broken bond was still there, still ached in quiet moments, still woke her with nightmares occasionally. But it no longer defined her. It was a scar she carried, not a wound that controlled her life. One evening, after a successful council meeting where her suggestions had resolved a complex taxation dispute, Alaric found her on a castle balcony overlooking the kingdom. You're not the same person who arrived here 2 months ago, he observed, standing beside her. Seris considered this. No. I'm not. Do you feel stronger? Yes. She paused, searching for the right words. In Iron Peak, I spent my whole life trying to be invisible. Trying not to be noticed because being noticed meant being judged and found lacking. Here. She gestured at the castle, the kingdom, everything Stormvale represented. Here, being noticed means being valued. It's completely different. You were always valuable, Alaric said gently. You just needed a place that recognized it. Seris turned to look at him, this Alpha King who'd saved her life and then given her space to rebuild it on her own terms. Thank you. For everything. For not treating me like a broken thing that needed to be fixed or a political tool that needed to be used. You were never broken. Alaric's silver-grey eyes were serious. Wounded, yes. Hurt badly. But not broken. There's a difference. As the sun set over Stormvale, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Seris felt something she hadn't felt in months, contentment. Not happiness, she wasn't sure she was ready for that yet. But a quiet satisfaction with who she was becoming. The girl Kaelen had rejected was gone. In her place stood someone stronger, smarter, more capable. Someone who'd earned her place through merit rather than destiny. And when the time came to face Kaelen again, because deep down, Seris knew that confrontation was inevitable, she would face him as an equal, not as the broken, inadequate girl he'd cast aside. 6 months after the rejection, a diplomatic courier arrived at Stormvale Castle bearing news that changed everything. Seris was in the council room reviewing border patrol reports when Corwin burst through the doors, his usual calm demeanor cracked with tension. Official summons from the Continental Council, he announced, holding up a scroll sealed with 6 different pack crests. The Grand Summit. 3 weeks from now. Alaric looked up from the trade agreements he'd been studying. They're actually enforcing it this year. Apparently, all major kingdoms are required to attend, including Iron Peak. Corwin's meaningful look at Seris made it clear why this was significant. The room seemed to tilt. Iron Peak. Which meant Kaelen. Seris's hand froze on the patrol report, her heart suddenly hammering against her ribs. The broken bond, which had been a dull ache she'd learned to live with, suddenly flared with phantom pain. We can request an exemption, Theron said quickly, noticing her reaction. Cite political tensions, schedule conflicts. No. Alaric's voice was firm. If we avoid the summit because of Kaelen, it looks like weakness. Like Stormvale fears Iron Peak. He looked at Seris. But you don't have to attend. I can bring other advisors. No one would question it. Seris took a slow breath, forcing herself to think past the panic. 6 months ago, she would have jumped at the excuse to hide. Would have done anything to avoid seeing Kaelen again, to avoid reliving that moment of public destruction. But she wasn't that girl anymore. If I hide, she said slowly, working through her thoughts out loud, then he wins. He made me feel worthless, and if I let that keep me from doing my job, from attending an important diplomatic function, then I'm agreeing with his assessment. She met Alaric's eyes. I won't give him that power. Are you sure? Myra asked gently. It's been 6 months, but seeing him again, being in that environment, will be difficult, Seris finished. Probably awful. But hiding from difficult things doesn't make them go away. It just means they still control you. Ilara nodded approvingly. Spoken like someone who's learned to fight back. The decision was made. Seris would attend the Grand Summit as Stormvale's chief advisor on territorial affairs. She would face Kaelen not as a rejected, broken mate, but as an equal, a respected member of another kingdom's delegation. The next 3 weeks were a whirlwind of preparation. Ilara took charge of Seris's diplomatic training with the intensity of a general preparing for war. The summit isn't just about formal negotiations, she explained during one of their daily sessions. It's theater. Everyone watching everyone else, looking for weaknesses, testing alliances. How you present yourself matters as much as what you say. They practiced every possible scenario. How to respond if Kaelen approached her. How to handle whispers and stares from wolves who remembered the rejection. How to maintain composure under pressure. The proper forms of address for various ranks. The subtle body language that communicated confidence versus vulnerability. What if he tries to talk to me privately? Seris asked. You don't owe him privacy. If he approaches, you respond with perfect politeness, cold, formal, distant. Treat him like any other diplomatic contact. No warmth, no familiarity, no acknowledgement of what was between you. And if he brings up the bond, you say, that matter was concluded 6 months ago. I have nothing to add. Then you walk away. Ilara's expression was fierce. You don't explain. You don't justify. You don't give him the satisfaction of seeing that he still affects you, even if he does. Myra handled the physical presentation. Together, they selected formal attire that struck the perfect balance, elegant without being ostentatious, professional without being severe. They settled on a gown in deep emerald green with silver embroidery along the sleeves and hem, formal enough for a royal summit but clearly marking her as Stormvale delegation through the color choice. You need to look like you belong there, Myra explained as they finalized the details. Not like you're trying too hard, but not like you're hiding either. Confident. Established. Someone who's earned her place. The night before their departure, Seris couldn't sleep. She stood on her balcony watching the moon, trying to prepare mentally for seeing Kaelen again. The bond would react. She knew that. Even broken, even 6 months dormant, mate bonds didn't completely die. She'd feel the pull, the ache, the instinctive recognition. But she wasn't the same person he'd rejected. She had to remember that. A knock on her door interrupted her thoughts. Alaric stood in the hallway, dressed casually, holding 2 cups of tea. Thought you might be awake, he said simply. They sat on her balcony together, the comfortable silence of friendship between them. I'm terrified, Seris admitted finally. Not of seeing him, well, yes, that too, but of, what if I revert? What if I see him and become that broken girl again? You won't, Alaric said with absolute certainty. How can you be sure? Because that girl was broken by someone telling her she was inadequate. You've spent 6 months proving, to yourself, not to him, that you're not. You've contributed to real policy changes. You've learned to fight, to think strategically, to hold your own in rooms full of powerful wolves. That's not something you can fake. It's who you've become. But the bond will hurt, Alaric acknowledged. It will probably hurt a lot. But pain doesn't erase growth. You can feel the bond and still know your worth. Those things aren't mutually exclusive. Seris considered this. What if he tries to apologize? Or worse, what if he doesn't care at all? Then that tells you everything about his character and nothing about your value. Alaric set down his teacup, his silver-grey eyes serious. Seris, listen to me. You're not going to the summit to prove anything to Kaelen. You're going because you're my advisor, because your insights are valuable, because you've earned the right to be in that room. His reaction, whatever it is, doesn't change those facts. After he left, Seris returned to staring at the moon. Her wolf stirred restlessly, uncertain about the coming confrontation. Show him, her wolf growled. Show him what he threw away. No, Seris whispered. We're not going to show him anything. We're going to do our job. That's all. His regret or lack thereof isn't our concern anymore. It was a lie, and she knew it. Part of her desperately wanted Kaelen to see what he'd rejected, to regret his choice, to feel even a fraction of the pain he'd caused her. But she was trying, genuinely trying, to mean it. The journey to the neutral summit grounds took 3 days. Stormvale's delegation traveled in comfort. Alaric, Seris, Theron, Ilara, Corwin, and 10 warriors for security. They took a well-maintained road through neutral territories, stopping at diplomatic waypoints along the route. Other kingdoms' delegations passed them on the road. Some nodded respectfully to Alaric, acknowledged as a fair and honorable king. Others stared at Seris with open curiosity. Word of the rejected mate who'd resurfaced in a rival kingdom had apparently spread through the rumor networks. Seris kept her head high, meeting their stares with calm indifference. On the second day, they passed a smaller delegation bearing Iron Peak's colors, black and crimson banners snapping in the wind. Seris recognized some of the warriors from the grand gathering 6 months ago. One of them stared at her with undisguised shock, clearly recognizing her. The broken bond flared with sudden, sharp pain. Kaelen was near, not here, but close enough that the severed connection could sense his presence. Seris's breath caught. Her hands clenched in her lap. Alaric, riding beside her in the carriage, noticed immediately. Breathe. Just breathe through it. He's here, Seris managed. At the summit already. Then he'll have time to hear about your arrival before you actually see him, Ilara said from across the carriage. Let him wonder. Let him anticipate. Put the discomfort on him for once. The advice helped. By the time they reached the summit grounds at sunset on the 3rd day, Seris had regained her composure. The summit hall was magnificent, an ancient castle built on neutral ground, belonging to no kingdom, maintained by the Continental Council for exactly these gatherings. Massive stone walls rose against the darkening sky, dozens of banners flying from various towers representing all the major packs, including Iron Peak's crimson and black, hanging prominently near the main entrance. Ready? Alaric asked as their carriage rolled to a stop. Seris smoothed her traveling cloak, checked that her hair was still properly styled, took one deep breath. Ready. They entered as a delegation, Alaric first, as befitting his rank, with Seris walking beside him rather than behind. A public statement that she was his equal, his advisor, not his subordinate. The entry hall was already crowded with delegations from various kingdoms, all in formal attire, all sizing each other up in that careful way of political gatherings. Conversations paused as Stormvale's party entered. The announcer's voice rang out, Alaric Stormvale, Alpha King, and his chief advisor on territorial affairs. Seris felt the weight of hundreds of eyes turning toward them. Heard the whispers starting, recognition spreading through the crowd like wildfire. That's her. The rejected mate. She's with Stormvale now. Look at her, she's completely different. And then, across the crowded hall, Seris felt it. The bond. Not gentle. Not subtle. It hit like a physical blow, 6 months of dormancy exploding back to life all at once. The hollow ache she'd learned to live with suddenly became a screaming, clawing need that made her knees nearly buckle. Her eyes found him automatically, pulled by the mate bond's irresistible force. Kaelen stood with his delegation near the far wall, mid-conversation with another alpha. He'd frozen mid-sentence, his face gone pale, one hand pressed against his chest as if trying to contain whatever he was feeling. Their eyes met across the crowded hall. For one endless moment, time seemed to stop. 6 months collapsed into nothing. Seris felt everything, the bond's pull, the memory of its breaking, the phantom pain where it had been, the agony of rejection, and underneath it all, the treacherous, instinctive recognition, mate. Kaelen looked terrible. Haunted. His eyes were shadowed, his face thinner than she remembered. The confident alpha king who'd rejected her had been replaced by someone who looked like they hadn't slept well in months. The bond was screaming at both of them, demanding they go to each other, demanding they fix what was broken, demanding they fulfill the god's original design. Then Alaric's hand touched her elbow gently, grounding, supportive, and the moment broke. Seris blinked, tore her gaze away from Kaelen, and turned her attention to the Stormvale delegation's assigned section. Walked past him without a second glance, as if he were just another wolf in the crowd. Behind her, she heard someone from Kaelen's delegation whisper urgently, "Your Majesty, are you all right?" She didn't turn around to see his response. Let him hurt, she thought fiercely. Let him feel a fraction of what he put me through. But her hands were shaking as she took her seat, and the broken bond in her chest was screaming louder than it had in 6 months. Alaric leaned close and whispered, "You did perfectly. Breathe." Seris breathed. And prepared for war. The first formal session of the Grand Summit began at dawn in the Great Council Chamber, a massive circular room designed to seat representatives from every major kingdom. The seating arrangement was deliberately strategic. Kingdoms were positioned based on size, power, and political alliances, with neutral territories acting as buffers between rivals. Stormvale's section was directly across from Iron Peaks, which meant Seris spent the entire morning acutely aware of Kaelen's presence 40 feet away, the broken bond a constant ache that made it difficult to concentrate on the proceedings. The Continental Council presided from an elevated platform, 5 elder alphas who governed inter-pack relations and mediated disputes. The head elder, a silver-haired wolf named Magistrate Voss, opened the session with traditional formalities before moving into the summit's agenda: trade regulations, border disputes, succession laws, and various petitions from smaller packs seeking council intervention. Seris forced herself to focus on the discussions, taking notes on matters that would affect Stormvale's territories. She could feel eyes on her periodically, wolves who remembered the rejection, who were curious about this transformed version of the inadequate girl Kaelen had discarded. Let them look. She had work to do. When a discussion arose about taxation policies affecting border territories, Alaric leaned toward Seris. "Your perspective would be valuable here." Seris's heart hammered. Speaking meant drawing attention. Drawing attention meant everyone, including Kaelen, would focus on her. But hiding helped no one. She stood, and the chamber quieted slightly. "If I may," she said, her voice steadier than she felt, "the proposed taxation structure looks equitable on paper, but it doesn't account for the reality of how border packs actually operate. The seasonal variations in trade, the way resources flow differently in outer territories versus central kingdoms, these factors make a flat taxation rate actively harmful to the packs it's meant to support." She outlined an alternative approach, drawing on her lived experience in Ash Valley and the research she'd done over the past months. When she finished, several delegates were nodding thoughtfully. Magistrate Voss looked intrigued. "Lady Seris, you present a compelling argument. The council will take your recommendations under advisement." As she sat down, Seris felt the weight of Kaelen's stare burning into her. She didn't look at him. Didn't acknowledge his existence beyond sharing air in the same room. The morning session continued. Seris contributed twice more to discussions, her insights earning respect from delegates who'd likely heard of her only as the rejected mate. Each time she spoke, she felt Kaelen's attention intensify. Good. Let him see what he'd deemed inadequate. During the lunch recess, several delegates approached the Stormvale section. A female alpha from the Eastern Territories complimented Seris's analysis of border economics. An older advisor from a neutral pack asked if she'd be willing to consult on similar issues in his territory. You've made quite an impression, Ilara murmured as they moved toward the dining hall. Half the summit is wondering where Alaric found such a brilliant advisor. And the other half knows exactly where he found me, Seris replied quietly. They're just too polite to mention it. The afternoon session focused on disputes between packs, territorial claims, broken alliances, grievances that required council mediation. Seris watched the proceedings with the analytical eye she'd developed under Alara's tutelage, noting who sided with whom, which kingdoms had hidden alliances, where the real power structures lay beneath the formal hierarchies. It was during a particularly tense dispute that Kaelen finally spoke. His voice, that voice she'd heard in nightmares for months, carried across the chamber with alpha authority. The Iron Peak Kingdom supports the Westridge claim. Our historical records show. But Seris noticed something. His argument was sound legally, but it ignored the practical reality of how the disputed territory was actually used by the smaller pack that would lose access. It was the same kind of top-down thinking she'd learned to recognize, policy that looked good on paper but ignored lived experience. Before she could stop herself, she was standing. With respect to Alpha King Kaelen, historical precedent doesn't address the current situation. The pack that would lose access to that territory depends on it for seasonal hunting. Removing that access doesn't just affect border claims, it threatens their survival. The chamber went silent. The rejected mate had just publicly contradicted her former destined mate in front of the entire summit. Kaelen's grey eyes locked onto hers, and the bond flared so intensely that Seris had to grip the table to stay upright. She saw shock in his expression, then something that might have been pain, then a carefully controlled mask. Lady Seris raises a valid point, Magistrate Voss said carefully, clearly aware of the undercurrents. Perhaps a compromise that addresses both legal precedent and practical necessity. The discussion continued, but Seris barely heard it. Her heart was racing, the bond screaming, every instinct demanding she go to him, explain herself, fix what was broken between them. She sat down slowly, feeling Alaric's supportive presence beside her. Across the chamber, Kaelen looked like he'd been struck. Evening fell on the summit with scheduled social time, less formal than the council sessions, meant to facilitate private negotiations and alliance building. The reception was held in the summit's gardens, lit by magical lights that floated among the trees. Seris needed air. Needed space from the constant weight of everyone's attention. She slipped away from the main gathering to a quieter terrace overlooking the gardens, breathing deeply of the cool night air. The broken bond was a constant scream now. Being in proximity to Kaelen for an entire day had awakened it fully after 6 months of dormancy. It felt like being torn in half all over again, her body reaching for something her mind knew she couldn't have. Shouldn't want. Seris. She closed her eyes at the sound of his voice. Of course. Of course he'd found her here. Alpha King Kaelen. She turned slowly, keeping her expression neutral, her voice formal. How may I assist you? He flinched at the cold courtesy. Don't do that. Don't pretend we're strangers. Aren't we? Seris raised an eyebrow. You made it abundantly clear 6 months ago that I was nothing to you. Inadequate. Unsuitable. A poor match for your throne. Kaelen stepped closer, and she saw the toll the months had taken. Dark circles under his eyes. A haunted quality to his expression. I was wrong. About everything. The bond, Seris, it's been destroying me. Every day without you has been. Has been what? She cut him off, surprised by her own anger. Painful? Difficult? Tell me, Kaelen, did you think about my pain when you rejected me in front of 500 witnesses? When you catalogued my flaws like you were reading charges against a criminal? I thought I was making the right choice for my kingdom. No. Seris's voice was sharp. You made the choice that was easiest for you. The one your advisors wanted. The one that fit your political plans. You didn't consider me at all except to list all the ways I didn't measure up to your standards. Kaelen's jaw clenched. I've regretted it every single day since. The bond won't let me forget. Won't let me sleep, won't let me eat properly, won't let me focus on anything except the knowledge that I destroyed something sacred. Good, Seris said coldly. I'm glad it hurts. I'm glad you can't sleep. Because maybe now you understand a fraction of what you put me through. I'll fix it. Desperation crept into his voice. There are ceremonies, reclamation rituals. I can formally acknowledge the bond, take back the rejection, make you my queen. We can. And what if I don't want that? Seris's question stopped him cold. What if I've learned that my worth isn't determined by whether an alpha king finds me suitable? Kaelen stared at her as if she'd spoken a foreign language. The bond is broken. You broke it. And I've spent 6 months learning to live without it. Seris stepped closer, meeting his eyes directly. You're not the only one who's been in pain, Kaelen. But while you've been suffering from regret, I've been rebuilding. I've discovered I'm actually quite capable when I'm not being judged for being common and plain and politically useless. You were never. He reached for her hand. Seris stepped back, avoiding his touch. Don't touch me. You lost that right. Seris, please. The gods chose us. The gods chose us, she agreed. And you rejected that choice. You chose pride and politics over destiny. So I made my own choice. I chose to become someone who didn't need a mate bond to have value. You're with him. It wasn't a question. Jealousy and possessiveness colored every word. Alaric. I see how he looks at you, how he stands beside you. The bond doesn't scream for him like it screams for me, so why are you with him? Because he values me, Seris said simply. Not because destiny forced him to, but because he chose to. He found me dying and saved me. Not to use me against you, not to claim me as some prize, but because he genuinely believed I deserved better than what you gave me. I can give you everything. You can give me a crown and a title and a place in your kingdom. But can you give me what Alaric gave me? Seris's voice softened slightly. Space to heal. Respect for my mind. Trust in my abilities. The freedom to discover who I am beyond being someone's mate. Kaelen's face twisted with anguish. I made a mistake. A terrible, unforgivable mistake. But the bond, Seris, surely you feel it too? It's tearing me apart to be this close to you and not. I feel it, Seris admitted. Of course I feel it. But feeling something doesn't mean I have to act on it. Pain is information, not a command. She turned to leave, then paused. You taught me something valuable, Kaelen. You taught me that I can survive rejection. That I can build a life and a purpose without a mate bond defining me. So thank you for that lesson, even though I wouldn't wish the way I learned it on anyone. Wait. But Seris was already walking away, leaving him alone on the terrace with the screaming bond and the weight of his regrets. Her hands were shaking. Her eyes burned with unshed tears. The bond was howling in her chest, demanding she go back, demanding she accept his apology, demanding she fulfill the destiny the gods had written. But she kept walking. Alaric found her in a quiet alcove, fighting to control her breathing. He didn't ask questions, just stood beside her until the storm passed. He tried to apologize, Seris said finally. And I told him no. That I'd learned to live without the bond. That his regret didn't obligate me to accept him. How do you feel? Seris considered honestly. Like I'm being torn in half. The bond wants him. My body wants him. But my mind, she touched her chest. My mind knows that wanting something doesn't mean it's good for me. That's wisdom, Alaric said quietly. Hard-won wisdom, but wisdom nonetheless. They returned to the reception together. Across the gardens, Seris could see Kaelen surrounded by his delegation, his face a carefully controlled mask that didn't quite hide the devastation beneath. Part of her felt savage satisfaction. Let him hurt. Let him understand what rejection felt like. But another part, the part still connected to him by fraying golden threads, felt his pain as if it were her own. This was going to be a very long summit. The second day of the summit began with deceptive calm. Morning sessions proceeded normally, discussions of trade routes, mediation of minor disputes, the mundane but necessary business of interpack relations. Seris contributed when appropriate, carefully avoiding looking toward Iron Peak's section where Kaelen sat with visible tension radiating from his posture. The terrace confrontation had clearly shaken him. Good. But around mid-morning, during a break between agenda items, Kaelen stood. The chamber quieted immediately. An Alpha King rising unexpectedly commanded attention, It usually signaled an important announcement or challenge. Seris felt her stomach drop. Something was wrong. She could see it in the set of his shoulders, the desperate determination in his eyes as they found hers across the chamber. Honored Council, Kaelen's voice rang with formal authority. I invoke ancient law. I claim the right of reclamation. Shocked gasps rippled through the chamber. The right of reclamation, a law so old most packs had forgotten it existed, used maybe twice in the last century. A law that stated a rejected mate bond could be reclaimed if the rejecting alpha proved worthy through ritual combat. No. No, he wouldn't. I, Kaelen Iron Peak, Alpha King of the Northern Territories, challenge Alaric Stormvale, Alpha King of the Eastern Reaches, for the right to reclaim Seris Ashvale as my mate and queen. The chamber erupted. Seris sat frozen in horror as pandemonium broke out around her. Delegates shouting over each other. Advisors frantically consulting ancient texts. The Continental Council calling for order. Kaelen had just reduced her to a prize to be won through combat. Had just announced to the entire summit that she was property to be claimed by whoever proved stronger. Rage flooded through her, hot and absolute. All eyes turned to Alaric, waiting for his response. He could refuse. The law was archaic, barely legitimate in modern times. Refusing would be politically costly, but within his rights. Alaric stood slowly, his silver-grey eyes locked on Kaelen with an expression of carefully controlled anger. Let me make certain I understand correctly, Alpha King Kaelen. You're challenging me to combat to reclaim a mate you publicly rejected 6 months ago. The bond remains, Kaelen said. Broken but not severed. The gods chose us, and I'm reclaiming what should have been mine from the beginning. What should have been yours, Alaric repeated softly, dangerously. Interesting phrasing. As if Seris is an object you misplaced rather than a person you destroyed. Magistrate Voss interrupted before Kaelen could respond. The right of reclamation is ancient law, rarely invoked. The council must deliberate on its validity in modern application. While you deliberate, Alaric said, his voice carrying to every corner of the chamber, let me be absolutely clear about my position. I accept this challenge. Seris's heart stopped. But not to claim Seris. I accept to defend her dignity and her right to choose her own path. Because unlike some alphas, his gaze bore into Kaelen, I understand that women are not possessions to be won or reclaimed. He turned to face Seris directly, speaking to her rather than about her. If I win this duel, the choice remains entirely yours. Stay with me as my advisor, return to your birth pack, forge your own independent path. Whatever you choose, I will support it without question or condition. Then he looked back at Kaelen. But tell me, Alpha King of Iron Peak, if you win this duel and Seris still refuses you, will you honor that choice? Or will you claim her anyway, just as you rejected her 6 months ago, without her consent, without her voice mattering? Kaelen's silence was damning. The chamber held its breath. I thought so, Alaric said quietly. That tells us everything we need to know about what this challenge is really about. Not love. Not destiny. Just ego and possession. Before anyone else could speak, Seris stood. Her chair scraped loudly against stone in the sudden silence. I am not a prize to be won. Her voice shook with fury but carried clearly. I am not property to be claimed. I am not an object you're fighting over like children quarreling over a toy. She turned to Kaelen first. You rejected me when you deemed me inadequate for your political plans. Now that I've transformed myself, no thanks to you, you want to reclaim me? That's not love, Kaelen. That's ego. You can't stand that I survived without you. That I thrived without you. That another king values what you discarded. Then to Alaric, and you, I appreciate your intentions, but I don't need you to fight for me to prove my worth. I know my worth now. I don't require validation through combat. She addressed the entire summit. This challenge reduces me to something to be won or lost based on which alpha proves stronger. It strips away my agency, my choice, my voice. And I will not accept that. Magistrate Voss leaned forward. Lady Seris, while your perspective is noted, the right of reclamation, if deemed valid, is law. The challenge has been issued and accepted. Then let me make my position equally clear, Seris said. Regardless of who wins tomorrow's duel, I will never, she looked directly at Kaelen, accept you as my mate. You had your chance with me. You chose to destroy it publicly and cruelly. That decision is final and irreversible, no matter how many duels you win. Kaelen's face went pale. The bond is broken, Seris finished. You broke it. And I refuse to let you unbreach it through violence and ego. I choose myself, Kaelen. I choose my own agency and dignity over your regrets and your bond madness. The council deliberated for 20 minutes while the chamber buzzed with speculation. Finally, Magistrate Voss rendered judgment. The right of reclamation is recognized as valid law, though archaic. The duel will proceed at dawn tomorrow under traditional moon law. Both fighters in wolf form. First blood or submission ends the combat. However, he looked at Seris. The council acknowledges Lady Seris's autonomy. Regardless of the duel's outcome, final choice of mate remains with her. If she refuses both alphas, both must honor that refusal. It was the best compromise possible, but it still meant the duel would happen. Kaelen looked grimly satisfied. Agreed. Alaric nodded. Agreed. Seris felt like screaming. This was happening. Two kings were going to fight over her tomorrow at dawn, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. That night, both kingdoms prepared their champions. In Iron Peak's quarters, Kaelen's advisors surrounded him, coaching strategy and technique. Alaric is older, more experienced, but you're faster, his beta said. Use your youth and speed. Don't let him draw it out. Kaelen barely heard them. The bond was driving him to distraction. Being so close to Seris for 2 days had awakened it fully. It screamed constantly now, demanding he go to her, claim her, fix what he'd broken. If you win, his chief advisor said carefully, and she still refuses you, what then? She won't refuse, Kaelen said with more confidence than he felt. Once the bond is properly re-established through ritual, once she remembers what we're supposed to be. She seemed quite clear that she'll refuse you regardless, another advisor pointed out. Kaelen's hands clenched. The bond is destiny. She can't fight destiny forever. She's hurt. Angry. But she still feels it. I know she does. Once I've proven myself worthy. By fighting another alpha for the right to claim her, his beta asked skeptically. By showing her I'll do anything to fix my mistake, Kaelen corrected. By proving the bond matters more than politics. But privately, in the dark hours before dawn, he wondered, what if winning the duel wasn't enough? What if she really meant it when she said she'd never accept him? The bond had become unbearable. 6 months of dormant ache had exploded into constant, screaming agony. Being near her and unable to touch her, to complete the bond, to fix what he'd broken, it was torture worse than any physical pain. He had to win tomorrow. Had to prove himself. Had to reclaim what the gods had given him. Even if she didn't want to be reclaimed. In Stormvale's quarters, the atmosphere was grimmer. You don't have to do this, Theron said for the 3rd time. We can still find a way out. Claim illness, invoke diplomatic immunity. No, Alaric said firmly. Refusing now would shame Stormvale and leave Seris in political limbo. The challenge is legal. I have to answer it. Then let's discuss strategy, Corwin said, spreading maps and notes across the table. Kaelen is younger, faster, more aggressive. You'll need to use experience, make him waste energy, wait for openings. Ilara listened to the tactical discussion, then asked the question everyone was avoiding, what if you lose? Silence fell. If I lose, Alaric said slowly, then the council's ruling stands, Seris still has final choice. I trust her to choose herself, regardless of the outcome. And if you win? Lissa asked. Then I make good on my promise. She chooses her own path, and I support whatever that path is. Myra, who'd been uncharacteristically quiet, finally spoke. This is insane. 2 grown alphas fighting over a woman who's made it crystal clear she doesn't want to be fought over. The whole thing is archaic and barbaric. Yes, Alaric agreed. But it's also law, and sometimes we have to work within broken systems to change them. If I can use this barbaric display to protect Seris's autonomy, then I'll do it. Hours before dawn, there was a soft knock on Alaric's private door. He opened it to find Seris standing in the hallway, wrapped in a dressing gown, her eyes red from crying. I'm sorry, she said immediately. This is my fault. If I hadn't come to the summit, if I'd stayed hidden, then Kaelen would still be carrying his regret and you'd still be hiding from your own life, Alaric interrupted gently. This isn't your fault. This is the consequence of Kaelen's choice 6 months ago. He's just finally facing them. You could be hurt tomorrow. Or worse. Because of me. Because of principle, Alaric corrected. Because I refuse to live in a world where women are treated as prizes to be won. Because I believe you deserve better than being reduced to an object two alphas fight over. Seris's tears spilled over. I don't want either of you to fight. I don't want violence done in my name. I just want to be free to choose my own path. I know. Alaric pulled her into a gentle embrace. And that's exactly what I'm fighting for tomorrow, your freedom to choose. Not my right to claim you. Not Kaelen's right to reclaim you. Your right to determine your own future. What if he wins and tries to claim me anyway? Then you say no. Loudly. Publicly. And every witness will know he's violating the council's ruling. He may be bond mad, but he's not stupid. He won't risk that kind of dishonor. Seris pulled back, looking up at him. If you win, and you refuse me the way I've refused him, would that be ironic or just sad? Alaric smiled slightly. I'm not refusing you. I'm refusing to own you. There's a difference. If you want to stay in Stormvale as my advisor, my friend, or something more, that's your choice to make. But it will always be your choice, Seris. Not mine. Not Kaelen's. Not the bonds. Yours. As she left to return to her own quarters, Seris felt the weight of what was coming. 2 kings would fight at dawn. One would win. One would lose. But she'd already made her choice. She just hoped they'd both respect it. Dawn broke cold and clear over the summit grounds. The entire gathering assembled at the ancient dueling circle, a ring of standing stones in a clearing outside the castle, used for ritual combat since before anyone could remember. Hundreds of wolves formed a living audience around the perimeter, witnesses to what would either be justice or tragedy. Seris stood with the Stormvale delegation, Myra's hand gripping hers tightly. The broken bond was screaming, knowing Kaelen was near, knowing violence was coming. The Continental Council presided from a raised platform. Magistrate Voss spoke the ritual words. Under moon law and ancient right, we witness this challenge. 2 alphas, 1 bond, trial by combat. The gods will judge worthiness. Kaelen and Alaric entered the circle from opposite sides. Both stripped to waist as ritual required, both radiating alpha power. Kaelen looked desperate, almost manic, bond madness clear in his eyes. Alaric looked calm, centered, determined. This is your last chance to withdraw, Voss said to both of them. Never, Kaelen said. I stand by my challenge acceptance, Alaric replied. Then shift. And may the gods guide the outcome. Both alphas shifted simultaneously. Kaelen became a massive black wolf with silver markings, powerful, aggressive, beautiful. Alaric became a silver-grey wolf, larger, older, moving with controlled precision. The magical barrier activated, preventing outside interference. They circled each other, and then Kaelen attacked. The fight was brutal and swift. Kaelen fought with desperate fury, all speed and aggression, trying to overwhelm through sheer force. Alaric fought defensively, using experience to counter rather than match Kaelen's frenetic energy. Blood splattered the stone circle. Both wolves landed hits. Kaelen was faster, but Alaric was smarter, reading patterns, waiting for the opening that desperation would inevitably create. It came when Kaelen, frustrated by Alaric's defense, overcommitted to a strike intended to end things quickly. Alaric sidestepped, used Kaelen's momentum against him, and in one fluid motion, pinned the younger wolf. Jaws at throat. Total dominance. Kaelen struggled, refusing to submit, but Alaric had the position. One more second of pressure would force yield or death. Finally, Kaelen's wolf submitted, a whimper, body going limp in surrender. The barrier dropped. Healers rushed forward as both alphas shifted back to human form, bleeding but alive. The challenge is decided, Voss declared. Alaric Stormvale is victorious. Kaelen lay on the stone, staring at the sky, defeated. The bond in his chest was still screaming, but now it was joined by the humiliation of public failure. Seris Ashvale, Voss called. Approach. Every eye turned to her. This was the moment. Her choice, witnessed by all. Seris walked into the circle, standing between both kings, one who'd rejected her, one who'd defended her. The bond pulled at Kaelen desperately. Her heart pulled toward Alaric gratefully. But neither pull was what she followed. She looked at Kaelen first. You fought because you couldn't accept losing something you discarded. That's not love. That's possession. Even if the bond screams, even if the gods chose us, I will never accept a mate who saw me as inadequate. Kaelen's face crumpled. Seris, please. This is not negotiable, she said firmly. You made your choice 6 months ago. Now live with it. She turned to Alaric. You fought for principle, not possession. You gave me space to heal, respect for my mind, freedom to choose. You've been teacher, friend, protector. Thank you. So what do you choose? Alaric asked gently. Seris addressed the entire summit. I choose myself. I choose the woman I've become. I choose respect over destiny, dignity over bonds, and agency over tradition. I'm not choosing Kaelen, that's obvious. But I'm also not choosing to be claimed by anyone, even someone who fought honorably. She met Alaric's eyes. If the offer still stands, I'd like to continue as Stormvale's advisor. As your partner in governance, equal, not subordinate. Not because of mate bonds or combat victories. Because I've earned that position through my work. Alaric smiled. The offer stands. Always. She looked back at Kaelen one final time. I hope you find peace. I hope you learn that rejecting destiny doesn't free you from consequences, it just means you live with the choice you made. I've made mine. Now make yours. Then she walked out of the circle, leaving 2 kings and 5 kingdoms stunned. 3 months later, Kaelen stood alone in his throne room, staring at nothing. The bond ached constantly, his eternal punishment for pride. He'd lost weight, rarely slept, couldn't focus on governance. His advisors whispered concerns about his fitness to rule. He'd rejected his mate and spent the rest of his life paying for it. Some lessons came too late. In Stormvale, Seris sat in her advisor's office, reviewing territorial reports. A young woman knocked hesitantly, a servant from a poor pack, uncertain, plain, reminded Seris of who she'd been. Lady Seris? I want to learn. To help my pack. But no one takes me seriously because they are fools who judge worth by appearance rather than character, Seris finished. Sit. Let me tell you about earning respect through competence rather than waiting for permission to matter. The girl's face lit with hope. Seris was paying forward what Alaric had given her, space for growth, respect for potential, belief in earned worth. That evening, Seris walked the castle grounds with Alaric. Easy companionship, mutual respect, genuine partnership. Any regrets? He asked. About choosing myself? Never. She paused. Sometimes I wonder about what could have been with the bond. But then I remember, I wasn't rejected because I was inadequate. I was rejected because he was. Inadequate in character, in honor, in seeing worth beyond status. And now I know my value isn't determined by whether someone chooses me. It's determined by whether I choose myself. She looked at him. Every single day. They stood watching sunset, 2 equals who'd found partnership without possession. Seris touched her chest where the bond had been. It still ached sometimes, probably always would. But she'd survived rejection. Built purpose. Discovered worth. Some stories end with happily ever after. This one ended with something better, and she lived fully, freely, on her own terms. Which was everything. The end. Want more stories of rejected mates who rise stronger? Where worth is earned, not given. Where women choose themselves before choosing anyone else. Follow for tales where broken bonds become pathways to power, and rejection becomes rebirth. What would you choose, a destined mate who rejected you, or the freedom to define your own worth? Comment below.